Welcome to The Case Files. We delve into the world's most compelling mysteries and cold cases, searching for answers in the shadows of history. Today, we travel back to a quiet summer morning, one that shattered the tranquil illusion of Canadian political life and introduced a harsh reality to the streets of Ottawa. The date was August 27, 1982. The city was calm, the diplomatic district of Ottawa was waking up. In a world preoccupied with the Cold War, Canada often felt insulated, a neutral observer. But on this morning, a vicious international conflict born from tragedies decades old arrived silently and lethally on our doorstep. Our subject is Colonel Atilla Altıkat, the Turkish military attaché to the Turkish embassy. A family man, a respected military officer, living a quiet diplomatic life in a safe city. His life and the peace of Canada were about to be abruptly, brutally extinguished by a political statement made with a bullet. This is the story of an act of calculated political violence that remains officially unsolved, claimed by a ghost in the shadows, the Armenian militant group ASALA. This is the cold case of Colonel Atilla Altıkat. As always, my name is Cody. I run this channel with my partner Katie. Welcome back to the Case Files Minds of Madness. A reminder, if you do find today's video interesting and informative, be sure to like and subscribe for more stories told by yours truly. Now grab a snack and a blanket, and let's dive in. The murder of Colonel Altıkat is more than just a case of violence. It's a case about historical grievances, political extremism, and the heartbreaking ease with which a safe, unsuspecting nation can become a battleground. We will reconstruct the events leading up to the assassination, the confusion and chaos of the immediate aftermath, and the complex historical context that ASALA used to justify its campaign of terror against Turkish officials globally. We will examine the limitations of the Canadian investigation and the lasting impact this unsolved crime had on diplomacy and security in the nation's capital. Before we proceed, if you are new to the Case Files Minds of Madness, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us continue to bring these critical stories to light. To understand the tragedy, we must first understand the victim. Colonel Atilla Altıkat was 45 years old at the time of his death. A highly respected officer in the Turkish armed forces, he had been assigned to the Turkish embassy in Ottawa as the military attaché. This role positioned him as the primary liaison between the Turkish and Canadian militaries, a task that required both diligence and diplomatic skill. He lived in the quiet residential suburb of the city, a peaceful contrast to the political intensity of Ankara. By all accounts, he was a dedicated professional and a committed family man, residing in Ottawa with his wife and 2 children. Their life was ordinary, characterized by the routines of a foreign service posting, school runs, diplomatic engagements, and the daily commute. Altykat's daily journey was a fixed, predictable schedule, a crucial detail that would be exploited by his attackers. Each workday, he would drive his official vehicle, a dark gray 1982 Ford Fairmont, from his home in the Nepean area towards the Turkish embassy, located in the prestigious Diplomatic Row near Rockcliffe Park. The route was scenic, often taking him along the Ottawa River Parkway, but on this particular morning he was traveling south on the Airport Parkway, heading toward the intersection with Carling Avenue. It was the last leg of his commute, a stretch of road characterized by light traffic and dense wooded verges, a perfect, isolated spot for an ambush. He was a Turkish diplomat living abroad during a period of intense, globally coordinated attacks. This was the dark backdrop to his life. From the late 1970s through the early 1980s, Turkish diplomats, officials, and their families had become targets of militant groups seeking vengeance for the historical events of the Armenian genocide. While Altıkat himself had no direct role in historical events, his uniform and his position made him a symbolic target. By 8:30 a.m. on August 27, 1982, Altıkat was alone in his car, approaching the Carling Avenue intersection. He was merely seconds from the point of no return. The morning was slightly overcast, a typical late summer day in Ottawa. Colonel Altıkat stopped his vehicle at a red light at the intersection of the Airport Parkway and Carling Avenue. Traffic was minimal, and he was completely exposed. What happened next was executed with chilling professional precision. As the colonel waited, a vehicle, possibly a red or burgundy car, though this detail remains frustratingly vague, pulled up alongside him, or perhaps positioned itself just behind. The consensus among investigators later pointed to a single assassin, likely operating with at least one lookout or getaway driver. A figure, believed to be male, approached the driver's side of Altıkat's car. The weapon of choice was a 9mm pistol. Witness reports are sparse and contradictory, but the result was devastating. Multiple shots were fired through the driver's side window, striking Colonel Altıkat in the head. It was an execution, quick, deliberate, and designed to ensure death. The traffic light was red, the engine was running, and then silence, broken only by the sound of a quickly departing car squealing away. The first person to reach the scene was a shocked motorist. They found the colonel slumped over the steering wheel. The scene was immediately recognized as a targeted attack, a political assassination. The location itself was telling, chosen for its accessibility for a quick escape onto the Queensway, Highway 417, the city's major artery. The Ottawa police immediately secured the area. This wasn't a random mugging. The wallet and valuables were untouched. This was a message. It was quickly treated as a case of terrorism, a rare and terrifying classification for a crime committed in the Canadian capital. Forensic teams collected the spent shell casings. They would be crucial later, but in the immediate chaos, the focus shifted to identifying the perpetrator's direction of travel and locating witnesses. The initial dragnet yielded little, as the crime occurred so quickly that few could offer a reliable, detailed description of the killer or the vehicle. The assassin or assassins had vanished into the morning traffic. The news spread rapidly through the diplomatic community and across the nation, an act of violence so audacious and foreign to the Canadian experience that it seized headlines instantly. The response was swift, intense, and deeply embarrassed. For decades, Canada had prided itself on being a safe haven, especially for foreign diplomats. The murder of a military attaché on a major city street was a profound breach of security. The Turkish embassy was instantly put under heightened protection. This was not the first attack of its kind. In 1979, the Turkish ambassador to the Netherlands had been killed by gunmen. The Turkish government had been warning NATO allies, including Canada, about the ongoing threat from Armenian militant groups. The most forceful condemnation came from Canada's then Prime Minister, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. In a statement delivered with palpable anger, Trudeau referred to the assassination as cowardly and expressed his shock and anger that such an act of political terrorism could occur in Ottawa. He made it clear that Canada would spare no effort in hunting down the perpetrators. The Canadian government was deeply concerned about the implications of the crime, specifically the violation of diplomatic immunity and the introduction of foreign political violence onto Canadian soil. The Ottawa police launched an extensive multi-agency investigation. They worked closely with the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and Canada's intelligence agency, CSIS, Canadian Security Intelligence Service. The scope of the investigation was immediately international, a significant challenge for a municipal police force. They knew they weren't looking for a local criminal. They were hunting a highly organized, politically motivated cell. Detectives focused on several key areas. Surveillance. Was Altıkat surveilled? His routine was so predictable it suggested a period of observation by the attackers. The vehicle. The vague descriptions of the red/burgundy car. A massive search for suspicious vehicles was launched, but no reliable lead materialized. The weapon. The ballistics analysis was critical. If the 9mm pistol could be linked to other attacks globally, it would confirm the connection to the larger militant campaign. But even as the police organized, the identity of the killers was already being claimed, not through a confession, but through a cold, formal communiqué. Within hours of the assassination, calls were placed to international news agencies in Beirut, Paris, and London. The organization claiming responsibility was the Armenian Secret Army for the Liberation of Armenia, or ASALA. To understand ASALA and their actions, we must briefly look at the historical conflict they were born from, the events of the Armenian Genocide of 1915-1923, during which an estimated 1.5 million Armenians perished under the Ottoman Empire. To this day, the Republic of Turkey vehemently denies the term genocide to describe the events, acknowledging massacres but disputing the systematic nature and the scale. It is this historical grievance and the Turkish government's denial that fueled the Armenian militant groups in the mid-20th century. ASALA was not the only group. Another key organization operating at the same time was the Justice Commandos Against Armenian Genocide, JCAG, also known as the Armenian Revolutionary Army, RA. Both groups aimed to force Turkey to acknowledge the genocide, pay reparations, and cede territory for an independent Armenian state. Their method was clear: assassinate Turkish diplomatic personnel worldwide to gain international attention and punish the Turkish government symbolically. The campaign of violence was widespread. In 1973, 2 Turkish diplomats were killed in Santa Barbara, California. In 1980, the Turkish ambassador to the Vatican was killed. In 1981, Turkish Consul General Kemal Arikan was murdered in Los Angeles. The attack on Colonel Altıkat in Ottawa was part of this highly coordinated global campaign. ASALA released a statement saying the assassination was an act of revolutionary violence and that Altıkat was targeted for his role as a military representative of the Turkish state. This claim complicated the Canadian investigation immediately. It turned a local murder into an international political puzzle. The Canadian police and intelligence agencies now had to track an organization with no known permanent base, no local cell structure beyond the immediate operatives, and a sophisticated network of escape routes and safe houses across Europe and the Middle East. The challenge wasn't identifying the motive. It was identifying the individual triggerman who stood on a quiet Ottawa street on that Friday morning. The Canadian police were relentless, but they were working against a wall of global complexity and a deliberate lack of evidence left at the scene. The key roadblocks: lack of local intelligence. ASALA was not a known entity in Canada. The individuals involved likely entered the country specifically for the operation and left immediately afterward. Local intelligence agencies had no prior wiretaps, no informants, and no local network to dismantle. Generic evidence. The 9mm casings were analyzed, but unless the specific weapon was recovered or the casings were definitively linked to another non-fatal attack, they provided no direct lead to the shooter. Witness failure. Despite the public appeal, witnesses to the actual shooting were virtually non-existent, or their descriptions were too vague to build a composite sketch or identify a specific vehicle. The red car lead proved a dead end. Investigators began to focus on travel and communications. They scrutinized flight manifests, border crossings, and communications between known militant groups internationally. But the trail had gone cold within days. The assassins were professionals. They had planned the operation for anonymity and swift egress. The case remained open, but the active investigation slowed significantly. The file became one of the most prominent cold cases in Canadian history, a chilling, unsolved political murder. The difficulty lay in the fact that the actual perpetrators were likely individuals from outside Canada, possibly recruited and trained in the Middle East or Europe, and they vanished back into that network. Canadian jurisdiction ended at the border, and cooperation with foreign agencies on politically sensitive cases like this was slow and often unyielding. For the Ottawa police, this was an unprecedented and deeply frustrating scenario. They were forced to maintain a file on a crime that could only be solved by political intelligence or a major arrest in a different country, events completely outside their control. The murder of Colonel Altıkat had immediate and far-reaching consequences for Canada and the diplomatic community. 1. Security changes. The Canadian government was forced to dramatically increase security for all diplomatic personnel, particularly those from Turkey. What was once considered a minor administrative posting in a safe city now required armed guards, armored cars, and increased surveillance. This added significant cost and complexity to the simple act of maintaining an embassy in Ottawa. The perception of Canada as politically neutral and immune from global conflict was shattered. 2. The political toll. The unsolved nature of the crime meant that ASALA and its affiliates achieved a level of impunity for their actions on Canadian soil. This contributed to a climate of fear and reinforced the group's propaganda that they could strike anywhere against any representative of the Turkish state without consequence. The family of Colonel Altıkat endured the ultimate loss, compounded by the lack of closure. The killer walked free, and the pursuit of justice was ultimately stymied by the sheer difficulty of penetrating an international terror cell. 3. The case of Hadok Tarakjian. The Altıkat case is often mentioned alongside the 1985 seizure of the Turkish embassy in Ottawa, where 4 members of JCAG took Ambassador Coşkun Kırca hostage. While the 1985 attackers were caught, convicted, and imprisoned in Canada, the Altıkat case remained different, a clean, surgical hit with no living perpetrators apprehended. Over the decades, the Ottawa Police Service has maintained the cold case file. Every few years, with advances in forensic science, there are public appeals for new information. Ballistic evidence, witness accounts, and vague descriptions are re-examined. But the critical piece, the identity of the individual shooter, has never been confirmed. To this day, the Altıkat case stands as the only assassination of a foreign diplomat in Canadian history. It is a scar on the nation's political landscape, a quiet reminder that even the most peaceful nations cannot fully escape the reverberations of history and global conflict. The tragedy remains, not just for the family of the colonel, but for Canada, which failed to bring the killer to justice.
Hey there! Before you take off, we'd just like to take a second and say that we really appreciate you sticking around to the end of the video. Katie and I are so grateful for the incredible Case Files community, so thank you for being a part of it. If you want to help the Case Files continue to grow, one of the easiest things you can do is leave a like on this video and consider subscribing. Be sure to hit that notification bell as well and select all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. We want you to know that we truly appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much, and we hope to see you soon.